At 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, when both pilots collapsed unconscious and 247 passengers faced certain death, a teenage girl with nothing but flight simulator experience stepped into the cockpit. What happened next defied every aviation protocol and became the most extraordinary emergency landing in military aviation history. The morning of September 15, 2023, started like any other day aboard military transport flight MT-847, a converted Boeing 767 carrying military personnel and their families from Joint Base Pearl Harbor to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego. Among the passengers was 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Colonel James Mitchell, a veteran F-22 Raptor pilot with over 20 years of service in the United States Air Force. Sarah had grown up on military bases around the world, surrounded by the thunderous roar of fighter jets and the disciplined precision of military aviation. Her father had often taken her to air shows and flight demonstrations, where she developed an insatiable fascination with aircraft. While other teenagers spent their time on social media, Sarah immersed herself in flight simulation software, logging over 2,000 hours on advanced civilian and military aircraft simulators. She had memorized aircraft manuals, studied aerodynamics, and could identify virtually every military aircraft by sound alone. What made this particular flight special was that it was Sarah's birthday gift from her father. A chance to visit the cockpit during the flight and meet the pilots. Captain Robert Hayes, a former Navy pilot with 15 years of commercial aviation experience, and First Officer Michael Torres, an ex-Air Force pilot transitioning to civilian flying, had welcomed the eager teenager into their domain just an hour into the flight. She asked questions that would make seasoned pilots proud, Captain Hayes would later recall from his hospital bed. This kid knew the difference between angle of attack and angle of incidence, understood the principles of lift and drag, and could explain the function of every instrument on our panel. I'd never seen anything like it from someone so young. The flight had been routine until 11:47 a.m. Pacific time. The aircraft was cruising at flight level 350, approximately 600 miles west of the California coast, when disaster struck with terrifying suddenness. Captain Hayes was reviewing the flight plan when he suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. Within seconds he collapsed forward onto the controls, unconscious. First Officer Torres immediately reached for the radio to declare an emergency, but before he could key the microphone, he too began showing signs of distress, dizziness, nausea, and rapid breathing. Unknown to the crew, a faulty valve in the aircraft's environmental control system had been slowly leaking carbon monoxide into the cockpit ventilation system. The colorless, odorless gas had been building up for nearly an hour, affecting the pilot's cognitive functions before rendering them unconscious. The passenger cabin's separate ventilation system kept the 247 souls in the back safe, but the two men responsible for their lives were now incapacitated. Sarah, who had been sitting in the observer seat behind the pilots, watching the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean below, realized something was catastrophically wrong when she heard Captain Hayes make a strange gurgling sound. She watched in horror as both pilots slumped in their seats, the aircraft's autopilot maintaining course but with no conscious human oversight. "Mayday, mayday, mayday." Sarah's voice cracked as she grabbed the radio microphone, her hands trembling but her mind surprisingly clear. "This is Military Transport 847. Both pilots are unconscious. We need immediate assistance." The response from Oakland Air Route Traffic Control Center was swift but filled with disbelief. "Transport 847, say again. Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 16 years old and I'm the only person in the cockpit who's conscious. Both pilots are down and I need help landing this plane." What followed was the most unprecedented emergency in modern aviation history. Within minutes, the entire Pacific region's air traffic control network had been alerted. The U.S. Navy diverted ships to potential crash sites, the Coast Guard scrambled rescue helicopters, and every major airport on the West Coast began clearing runways and preparing for the worst. But Sarah wasn't panicking. Years of military discipline instilled by her father, combined with her extensive simulator experience, had prepared her for this moment in ways she never could have imagined. She quickly assessed the situation. The autopilot was maintaining altitude and heading, fuel levels were adequate for several more hours of flight, and weather conditions were favorable. Her first priority was getting help. Air traffic control patched her through to Captain Jim Hawk Morrison, a top instructor pilot at the Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base. Morrison, a veteran of over 4,000 flight hours in everything from F-16s to experimental aircraft, would become Sarah's lifeline over the next 3 hours. "Sarah, I need you to stay calm and tell me exactly what you see in front of you," Morrison's steady voice came through the radio. "Can you describe the instrument panel?" With remarkable composure, Sarah began describing the Boeing 767's cockpit in detail. She identified the primary flight display, the navigation display, engine instruments, and flight management computer. Morrison was astounded by her knowledge. This teenager was using proper aviation terminology and demonstrating an understanding of aircraft systems that surpassed many rookie pilots. The situation became more complex when Morrison realized that while Sarah understood flight principles and aircraft systems, she had never actually flown a real aircraft. Everything she knew came from simulators and textbooks. Landing a 180,000-pound jet aircraft carrying 247 people would require skills that no simulator could fully replicate. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, word had spread about the situation. Military personnel aboard the flight immediately took charge, maintaining order and preparing for potential emergency procedures. Master Sergeant Linda Rodriguez, a veteran loadmaster with 18 years of experience, coordinated with the flight attendants to secure the cabin and brief passengers on emergency protocols. Colonel Mitchell, Sarah's father, was torn between pride and terror as he listened to his daughter's calm communications with air traffic control through the aircraft's passenger address system. "That's my girl," he whispered to his wife, tears streaming down his face. "She's got ice water in her veins." As the crisis unfolded, the Pentagon's Crisis Action Center activated Emergency Protocol 7, reserved for incidents involving military aircraft carrying personnel and their families. General Patricia Williams, commander of Air Mobility Command, personally took charge of the operation, coordinating with civilian authorities and military units across the Pacific region. The plan that emerged was both brilliant and terrifying in its complexity. Rather than attempting to land at a civilian airport, the decision was made to direct Sarah to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, their original destination. The runway was longer, emergency services were more extensive, and most importantly, the military personnel there had experience with unconventional emergency procedures. But first, Sarah needed to learn how to actually fly the aircraft manually. With the autopilot engaged, she began a crash course in aviation that would normally take months to master. Captain Morrison, now joined by a team of Boeing 767 instructors and military pilots, guided her through each step. "Sarah, I want you to place your hands gently on the yoke, that's the steering wheel in front of you," Morrison instructed. "Don't grip it tightly, just rest your hands there and feel how the aircraft responds to small inputs." For the next hour, Sarah practiced basic aircraft control under Morrison's guidance. She learned how gentle pressure on the yoke affected the aircraft's pitch, how the rudder pedals controlled yaw, and how the throttles managed engine power. Each maneuver was practiced in small increments, with the autopilot ready to take over if things went wrong. The most challenging aspect was understanding the aircraft's weight and momentum. Unlike the lightweight training aircraft in simulators, the Boeing 767 responded slowly to control inputs, requiring patience and anticipation. Sarah had to learn to think ahead of the aircraft, making control inputs well before the desired result. As news of the emergency spread, military bases across the country began following the drama. At Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, pilot training was suspended as instructors and students gathered around radios, listening to Sarah's progress. At Naval Air Station Pensacola in Florida, Navy flight instructors used the incident as a real-time teaching moment for their students. The most critical phase approached as Sarah prepared for descent and landing. With 2 hours of fuel remaining, there was no room for multiple practice approaches. She would have one chance to get it right. "Sarah, we're going to begin our descent now." Morrison's voice remained steady, but those listening could hear the tension. "I want you to reduce power on both throttles to about 85%, and gently push forward on the yoke to begin a 500-foot-per-minute descent." As the aircraft began its descent toward San Diego, emergency crews at Naval Air Station North Island prepared for the worst-case scenario. Fire trucks lined the runway, medical helicopters stood ready, and crash boats positioned themselves in the bay adjacent to the airfield. News crews, kept at a safe distance, broadcast the unfolding drama to millions of viewers worldwide. Sarah's descent was textbook perfect, maintaining airspeed and descent rate with precision that amazed the experienced pilots guiding her. Her simulator experience was paying dividends as she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of energy management, the critical skill of balancing altitude, airspeed, and power settings. "She's flying that airplane like she's been doing it for years," observed Commander Sarah Johnson, a Navy test pilot monitoring the approach from North Island's tower. Her control inputs are smooth, deliberate, and appropriate. This is absolutely incredible. The approach phase proved to be Sarah's greatest challenge. Unlike the forgiving environment of a flight simulator, real aircraft respond to wind, turbulence, and atmospheric conditions that can't be perfectly replicated in training devices. As the aircraft descended through 10,000 feet, Sarah encountered her first significant turbulence. "The plane is shaking and I'm having trouble keeping it steady." Sarah's voice showed the first signs of stress as moderate turbulence buffeted the aircraft. "That's completely normal, Sarah," Morrison reassured her. "The aircraft is designed to handle much worse than this. Just maintain gentle pressure on the controls and let the aircraft find its own stability. Don't fight the turbulence, work with it." As the Boeing 767 descended through 5,000 feet, San Diego's skyline came into view. Sarah could see North Island's runway in the distance, a narrow strip of concrete that seemed impossibly small for the massive aircraft she was controlling. Her heart raced, but her hands remained steady on the controls. The final approach began at 3,000 feet. Sarah reduced power further, extended the landing gear with Morrison's guidance, and configured the aircraft for landing. Each step was methodical, double-checked, and executed with a precision that would have made any flight instructor proud. Gear down and locked, flaps at 30 degrees, airspeed 165 knots, Sarah reported, reading from the instruments with the professionalism of a seasoned pilot. "I can see the runway now." At 1,000 feet above the ground, Sarah encountered the most dangerous part of any landing, the final approach. Wind conditions were favorable, but the psychological pressure was enormous. Below her, 247 people trusted her to get them safely on the ground. Behind her, unconscious in their seats, the two pilots whose job this should have been remained unresponsive. "Sarah, you're doing perfectly," Morrison's voice was calm and encouraging. "Airspeed looks good, you're on the center line, and your descent rate is exactly where it should be. In about 2 minutes, you're going to be on the ground." As the aircraft crossed the runway threshold, Sarah faced the moment every pilot trains for but hopes never to experience in an emergency situation: the landing flare. This critical maneuver requires pulling back gently on the controls to raise the aircraft's nose, reducing the descent rate just before touchdown. "Now, Sarah, very gently pull back on the yoke," Morrison instructed. "Not too much, just ease it back slowly." What happened next would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world for months to come. Sarah's landing was not just successful, it was nearly perfect. The main landing gear touched down smoothly, followed by the nose gear, with barely a bump felt throughout the aircraft. The thrust reversers deployed automatically, and Sarah applied wheel brakes as instructed, bringing the massive jet to a stop with over 3,000 feet of runway remaining. The cheer that erupted from the passenger cabin was deafening. Military personnel, their spouses, and children who had faced the very real possibility of death just hours earlier were now safely on the ground, thanks to a 16-year-old girl who had never flown a real airplane before. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft within seconds, and paramedics rushed aboard to attend to the unconscious pilots. Both Captain Hayes and First Officer Torres were quickly stabilized and transported to Balboa Naval Medical Center, where they made full recoveries after treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning. Sarah remained in the cockpit for several minutes after landing, her hands still gripping the controls, the magnitude of what she had just accomplished slowly sinking in. When she finally emerged from the aircraft, she was met by her father, whose emotional embrace was captured by news cameras and became an iconic image of the day. The investigation that followed revealed the faulty environmental control system valve that had caused the carbon monoxide leak. The incident led to immediate inspections of similar aircraft and new protocols for detecting and preventing such occurrences in the future. Sarah's actions had implications far beyond the immediate emergency. The aviation industry began examining how flight simulation training could be enhanced to better prepare both professional pilots and aviation enthusiasts for emergency situations. Military flight training programs incorporated her experience into their emergency procedures curriculum. Recognition for Sarah's heroism came from the highest levels of government and military leadership. President Biden personally called to congratulate her, and she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the youngest civilian ever to receive the honor. The Air Force presented her with the Airman's Medal for Heroism, while the Navy awarded her the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. More importantly for Sarah's future, her actions opened doors that would have been impossible to imagine before that September morning. Every major airline in the country offered her internships and future pilot positions. The Air Force Academy extended a guaranteed appointment, with fast-track programs for pilot training. Boeing invited her to participate in their test pilot programs. But perhaps the most significant impact was on aviation safety and emergency procedures. The incident highlighted the importance of cockpit resource management and the potential for non-professional pilots to contribute in emergency situations. New training programs were developed to teach basic aircraft control to flight attendants and other aviation professionals who might need to assist in similar emergencies. Sarah's story also transformed public perception of teenage capabilities and the value of simulation-based learning. Educational institutions began incorporating more sophisticated flight simulation into STEM programs, recognizing that virtual training could have real-world applications in crisis situations. The two pilots whose lives Sarah helped save became her biggest advocates. Captain Hayes, after his recovery, personally thanked her at a ceremony at Edwards Air Force Base. "This young woman didn't just save our passengers," he said. "She saved my life and Mike's life too. There's no greater gift than that." First Officer Torres, who decided to return to military service after the incident, requested Sarah as his wingman if she ever joined the Air Force. "I've flown with combat veterans and test pilots with thousands of hours of experience," he said. "But I've never seen the combination of skill, composure, and natural ability that Sarah demonstrated that day." The broader military aviation community embraced Sarah as one of their own. She was invited to air shows, demonstration flights, and military ceremonies across the country. Young people, especially girls interested in aviation, found in her a role model who proved that age and gender were no barriers to extraordinary achievement in military and civilian aviation. 1 year after the incident, Sarah began her studies at the Air Force Academy, having chosen military service as her path forward. Her goal is to become a test pilot, following in the footsteps of aviation pioneers like Chuck Yeager and modern military aviators who pushed the boundaries of flight technology. The lessons learned from Flight MT-847 continue to influence aviation safety protocols worldwide. The incident proved that proper training, whether in simulators or real aircraft, combined with clear thinking and good communication, could overcome seemingly impossible odds. It also demonstrated the importance of having knowledgeable backup personnel available during emergencies. For Sarah Mitchell, now known in aviation circles as the Miracle Teen Pilot, the experience changed her life in ways she never could have anticipated. But she remains humble about her role in the emergency. "I just did what anyone would do in that situation," she often says. "I had help from incredible people on the ground, and I was lucky to have learned so much from simulators and my dad's stories about flying." Her father, Colonel Mitchell, perhaps said it best, "That day my daughter didn't just save 247 lives. She proved that the next generation of military aviators has the right stuff to handle anything the sky can throw at them." I couldn't be prouder of her, not just as her father but as a fellow pilot. Today, as Sarah continues her journey toward becoming a military pilot, Flight MT-847 serves as a reminder that heroism can emerge from the most unexpected places. A 16-year-old girl with simulator experience and an unshakable determination proved that sometimes, the impossible is just another word for what hasn't been tried yet. The sky, it seems, is truly the limit when courage meets opportunity at 35,000 feet.